We are glad to welcome you to the Lucas History Channel. Please like and subscribe if you want to see more stories like this. Enjoy your viewing. I always thought I knew my wife. Beth was the kind of woman who could light up a room just by walking into it. Her laugh was infectious, her blue eyes sparkled when she was happy, and for over a decade, I felt like the luckiest man alive to call her my wife. That belief ended on an ordinary Wednesday evening. It started with something small, as these things often do. She had been spending more time on her phone lately, smiling at texts that she quickly hid when I walked into the room. At first, I dismissed it. Beth had always been social, and I didn't want to be the insecure husband snooping through her messages. But the signs were piling up. "I'm meeting Sarah for drinks tonight," she said one evening, grabbing her purse. Her tone was casual, but her eyes darted away as she spoke. "Sarah?" I asked, puzzled. "I thought you two had a falling out." She hesitated, just for a moment, before recovering. "We patched things up. Don't wait up for me, okay?" Something about her words didn't sit right, but I didn't press. I didn't want to be that guy, the suspicious, overbearing husband. That night, she came home late, her hair slightly disheveled and a faint, unfamiliar cologne lingering on her clothes. When I asked how her evening went, she brushed past me with a simple, "It was fine." Over the next few weeks, the distance between us grew. Her excuses became more frequent, work meetings that ran late, impromptu shopping trips, sudden plans with friends I'd never heard of. And through it all, she seemed happier, almost glowing, but not in a way that included me. The breaking point came on a rainy Friday afternoon. I had come home early from work, eager to surprise her with a dinner reservation at her favorite restaurant. But as I walked into the living room, I heard her voice from the kitchen. "Okay, just give me a minute," she said, her tone soft, intimate. I froze, listening as the conversation unfolded. "I know," she murmured, a laugh in her voice. "I can't wait to see you either. Last time was, well, unforgettable." The blood drained from my face. "Tomorrow. I'll figure something out. Mark won't suspect a thing." I didn't hear the rest. My ears were ringing as I walked back out the door, closing it quietly behind me. My heart pounded as I sat in the car, trying to make sense of what I had just heard. I wanted to storm back in, confront her, demand answers, but something held me back. Maybe it was fear. Fear of what she might say, of what I might do. Instead, I drove aimlessly, replaying her words over and over in my mind. Hours later, when I finally returned home, Beth greeted me with a smile, as if nothing had happened. "Hey, you're back late. Everything okay?" Her casual demeanor was a knife to the gut. "Yeah," I said flatly. "Just a long day." That night, as she slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. How had we gotten here? How had the woman I loved, the mother of my children, become a stranger? The next morning, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let this fester. I needed the truth, no matter how much it hurt. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, casting pale stripes across the bedroom. Beth was already up, bustling around in the kitchen, humming a cheerful tune. It felt surreal to watch her go about her day as though nothing had happened, as though she wasn't hiding something that could shatter everything we had built. I followed her, steadying my breath. "Beth," I began, keeping my tone light, "do you have a minute?" "Of course," she said, smiling. "What's on your mind?" I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. "You've been out a lot lately. Work, friends, errands. It feels like I don't see you as much. Is everything okay?" Her smile faltered, just for a second. "Oh, Mark, don't be silly. You know how busy life gets." She brushed past me to grab a coffee mug. Her evasiveness tightened the knot in my stomach. "It's just. I heard you on the phone yesterday." She froze, her back to me. The room grew heavy with silence. "What exactly did you hear?" she asked, her voice calm but with an edge of steel. "Enough," I said quietly. "Who were you talking to?" Beth turned to face me, her expression guarded. "Mark, you're making something out of nothing." "I was chatting with a friend from work." "A friend," I echoed. "A friend who thinks last time was unforgettable. A friend you can't wait to see." Her cheeks flushed. "I don't know what you think you heard, but you're wrong." "Am I?" I stepped closer, my voice rising. "Then tell me the truth, Beth. Who were you talking to?" She crossed her arms, defiance flickering in her eyes. "You're being ridiculous. It was just a private conversation, Mark. Can't I have those?" "Not when it sounds like you're planning an affair," I shot back. Her eyes narrowed. "You have no idea what you're talking about." "Then explain it to me," I demanded. "Make me understand why my wife is sneaking around, lying about her plans, and talking to someone else like that." Beth sighed, rubbing her temples. "Fine," she said at last. "You want the truth. Here it is. I've been feeling stuck. Like I've lost who I am outside of this house, outside of being a wife and mother." "That's not an excuse," I said. "No, it's not," she snapped. "But it's the reason. And yes, there's someone else. Someone who makes me feel alive again, who reminds me that I'm more than a cook and a maid and a mom." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. "So that's it? 10 years of marriage, 3 kids, and you throw it all away because you're bored?" "It's not about being bored, Mark. It's about feeling like a person again." "A person," I echoed bitterly. "And what am I? Just the guy who pays the bills and changes the light bulbs?" She looked away, her silence louder than any argument. "You could have talked to me," I said, my voice breaking. "You could have told me how you felt. We could have fixed this together." Beth shook her head. "I didn't think you'd understand." "You're right," I said coldly. "I don't." I turned and left the room, my chest tight with anger and betrayal. I couldn't stay in the same house with her, not after what she had just admitted. Later that afternoon, I packed a bag and left. The kids were at my mother's for the weekend, sparing them from the tension hanging in the air. As I drove aimlessly through town, my mind spun with questions. How long had this been going on? How far had it gone? Was it too late to save our marriage, or was it even worth saving? By the time I pulled into a motel parking lot, I was no closer to an answer. I sat in the car, staring at the warn sign flickering above me. This wasn't how life was supposed to be. The motel room was as bleak as I felt, musty carpet, faded wallpaper, and a bed that creaked with every movement. I tossed my bag onto the chair and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall. I replayed the conversation with Beth over and over in my mind. Her words, her tone, the hollow look in her eyes, they were foreign, like they belonged to someone I didn't know. How had we gotten to this point? My phone buzzed on the nightstand. Her name lit up the screen. I let it ring until it went to voicemail, then listened to the message, my jaw tightening with each word. "Mark, please come home," Beth said, her voice cracking. "I'm sorry, okay? I didn't mean for it to get this far. It was never supposed to be serious, just a way to feel something again. I love you, Mark. I love our family. Please, let's fix this." I threw the phone onto the bed, my chest tightening with anger. Love? She dared to call this love? My mind spiraled. Who was this man? How had she met him? Was he someone I knew, someone who had smiled in my face while stabbing me in the back? Before I could stop myself, I grabbed the phone and opened the messages. Part of me still wanted to believe her, to find a way to make sense of this nightmare. But what I saw shattered whatever hope I had left. There were texts, dozens of them, between Beth and someone named Eric P. The words blurred together as I scrolled through. Last night was incredible. I can't stop thinking about you. Are you free tomorrow? I'll make an excuse to get away. Mark suspects something, but I can handle it. My hands shook as I read the messages, each one a dagger to the heart. Eric wasn't just some passing fling. He was a constant presence in her life, someone she had let into spaces that belonged to me, her heart, her time, her body. One message stood out, a recent one sent just hours ago. Don't worry about Mark. He'll come around. He's too decent to leave. I felt a bitter laugh rise in my throat. She thought I was too decent to leave. The anger built inside me, a storm I could barely contain. I didn't know who Eric was yet, but I would find out. And when I did, he would realize just how wrong Beth was about me. The next morning, I woke up early, the restless night leaving me exhausted but determined. I needed clarity, and that started with finding out who Eric was. A quick online search led me to his profile. He was a local cop, a fact that only fueled my fury. The gall of him, pretending to uphold the law while helping destroy my family. His profile was filled with pictures of him in uniform, smiling for the camera, a man who looked confident, even trustworthy. The rage was instant and consuming. I wanted to confront him, to make him feel even a fraction of the pain he had caused. But I knew that wouldn't help. If I lost my temper, I'd only make things worse. Instead, I took screenshots of the messages, saving every bit of evidence. I had no idea how messy this was going to get, but I was ready to fight for what mattered most, my kids. By noon, I had contacted a lawyer, someone with a reputation for being tough and relentless. We met at her office, a no-nonsense woman named Claire who didn't waste time sugarcoating the situation. You've got a strong case, she said, scanning through the texts. Mississippi takes adultery seriously, and you have the proof to back it up. But this won't be easy. Are you ready for that? I nodded. I don't care how hard it is. I just want to protect my kids and make sure Beth faces the consequences of what she's done. Claire leaned back in her chair, studying me. Good. Then let's get to work. The day felt like a blur after that. I avoided Beth's calls, ignored her messages, and focused on the steps Claire laid out for me. But as the sun set, the weight of everything began to press down on me again. I drove to my mother's house to see the kids. Their laughter and hugs were a balm to my fractured heart, even if they didn't understand what was happening. Where's Mommy? Natalie, my eldest, asked. She's busy right now, I said, forcing a smile. But you're staying with Grandma for a bit, okay? Natalie frowned but nodded. Will she be back soon? I hesitated, my throat tightening. We'll see, I said softly. As I tucked them into bed that night, I realized just how much I had to fight for. My world was crumbling, but these three little faces were the reason I couldn't let it fall apart completely. The days that followed were a whirlwind of legal meetings, phone calls, and strategy sessions. Beth kept trying to reach me, alternating between angry texts and tearful voicemails. She accused me of overreacting, begged me to come home, and even blamed me for not understanding her needs. But I couldn't let her words sway me. Every message she sent only reminded me of the betrayal, the life we had shared, the trust she had shattered, and the man who had taken my place in her arms. By midweek, Claire had everything she needed to move forward. We'll file for divorce based on adultery, she explained, tapping her pen against her desk. With the evidence you've gathered, we'll push for primary custody. It won't be easy, but the court tends to favor stability for the children. Your wife's actions could tip the scales in your favor. I nodded, though her words felt hollow. Winning custody wouldn't erase what had happened. It wouldn't fix the cracks in my heart or restore the life I thought I had. But it was a step forward. That evening, as I sat in the quiet of the motel room, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was a new message from Beth. Mark, I know you're hurt, but please, let's talk. Just once. For the kids. I'll be at the park tomorrow at 2 p.m. If you don't come, I'll understand, but I hope you will. I love you. I stared at the message, my chest tightening. Part of me wanted to delete it, to ignore her completely. But another part, the part that still remembered the woman I had married, wanted answers. I typed a quick reply, I'll be there. The park was almost empty when I arrived. A cold breeze rustled the leaves, and the playground stood silent, the swings creaking faintly in the wind. Beth was sitting on a bench near the duck pond, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. When she saw me, she stood, a tentative smile on her lips. Mark, she said softly. I didn't respond, keeping my distance. What do you want, Beth? She hesitated, her eyes searching mine. I want to explain. Explain? I echoed, my voice hard. You mean justify what you did? Her shoulders sagged. I made a mistake, she admitted. I was lonely, Mark. You were always working, always stressed. I felt invisible. That's not an excuse, I snapped. You could have talked to me. You could have told me how you felt. Instead, you chose him. Beth flinched at my words, tears welling in her eyes. It wasn't about choosing him. It was about finding something I'd lost. You didn't lose anything, I said coldly. You threw it away. She sank back onto the bench, her face crumpling. I didn't mean for it to get this far. I never wanted to hurt you. I crossed my arms, staring down at her. But you did. And now our kids are going to grow up in a broken home because of it. Beth sobbed, covering her face with her hands. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of guilt. But then I remembered the messages, the lies, the phone calls she had hidden from me. Is he worth it? I asked quietly. She looked up, her face streaked with tears. No, she whispered. He never was. I was just so lost. I didn't know how to find my way back. It's too late for that, I said, my voice firm. You've made your choices, Beth. Now we have to deal with the consequences. She nodded slowly, her expression hollow. Do you hate me? I paused, the weight of her question pressing down on me. No, I said finally. But I'll never forgive you. Her sobs grew louder as I turned and walked away, leaving her alone on the bench. As I drove back to the motel, I felt a strange sense of closure. The pain was still there, raw and aching, but for the first time in days, I could see a path forward. It wouldn't be easy, but I would rebuild. For my kids. For myself. For the life Beth had thrown away. The next few weeks were a blur of motions and meetings. My lawyer, Claire, moved swiftly, filing the necessary documents for divorce and custody. Beth, as expected, pushed back. She pleaded for reconciliation, citing the children, our history, and her regret. But every time I saw her, every time I heard her voice, the memory of those messages and her betrayal resurfaced. The life we had built together had been irreparably damaged, and there was no going back. One afternoon, I received an unexpected call from Eric's wife, Karen. Her voice trembled as she introduced herself, her words tentative but resolute. I found your number in some of the messages between my husband and your wife, she explained. I didn't know who else to turn to. I felt a pang of sympathy. If anyone understood what she was going through, it was me. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop on the edge of town. Karen was a petite woman with tired eyes and a forced smile, the kind that comes from trying to hold it together for too long. I'm sorry to reach out like this, she began, her hands wrapped around her coffee mug. I just thought you should know that I'm filing for divorce. Eric, he's been unfaithful before. Your wife isn't the first. Her words felt like a punch to the gut. I didn't realize, I trailed off, unsure of what to say. Karen nodded, her eyes welling with tears. I stayed the first time for the kids. I thought he'd change. But this is too much. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of our shared pain hanging in the air. I'm sorry for what you're going through, I said finally. No one deserves this. Karen gave me a sad smile. Neither do you. That conversation stayed with me as the weeks turned into months. I threw myself into my work, into my role as a father, and into rebuilding the life Beth had shattered. My kids became my anchor, their laughter and love reminding me of what was truly important. Beth and I finalized the divorce just before the holidays. The court granted me primary custody, a small victory in the midst of so much loss. Beth was allowed supervised visits, a reality that seemed to crush her more than anything else. I never wanted to lose them, she had said during our final hearing, tears streaming down her face. Then you should have thought of them before you betrayed their father, I replied, my voice steady but firm. One evening, as I tucked my youngest, Mark Jr., into bed, he looked up at me with wide, innocent eyes. Daddy, will Mommy come back home someday? The question caught me off guard, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. No, buddy, I said gently. But she still loves you very much, and she always will. He nodded, his little face thoughtful. Do you still love her? I paused, my chest tightening. I used to, I admitted. But sometimes, love changes. And that's okay. Mark Jr. seemed to accept my answer, snuggling deeper into his blankets. I love you, Daddy. I love you too, buddy, I said, pressing a kiss to his forehead. As the years went by, the pain of Beth's betrayal began to fade, replaced by a quiet strength. I learned to find joy in the small moments, Natalie's school plays, Emma's soccer games, and Mark Jr.'s endless curiosity. Beth tried to rebuild her relationship with the kids, but it was never the same. They loved her, but there was a distance, a subtle hesitance that even time couldn't erase. As for me, I eventually found someone new, someone who valued honesty, loyalty, and the life we built together. She didn't try to fix me or erase my past. She simply stood by my side, helping me move forward. And for the first time in a long time, I felt whole again. Sometimes, I still think about that rainy Friday afternoon, the phone call that changed everything. It was the end of one chapter, but it wasn't the end of my story. Because life, even after betrayal, goes on. And if you're willing to fight for it, it can still be beautiful. Years later, the wounds Beth had left on my heart had long since scarred over. Life had taken on a steady rhythm, filled with moments of joy and quiet contentment. I had remarried, a kind, compassionate woman named Lauren, who brought warmth and stability back into my life. Together, we built a home where my children could thrive, a place where love wasn't taken for granted. Beth remained a part of their lives, though her role was diminished. She never remarried, and despite her best efforts to make amends, her relationship with the kids remained fractured. There were awkward holidays and strained conversations, but time softened their resentment into something resembling civility. One evening, years after everything had unfolded, I found myself sitting on the porch, a cool breeze rustling through the trees. My eldest, Natalie, now a young woman, joined me with 2 mugs of tea in hand. Hey, Dad, she said, passing me a mug. Hey, Nat, I replied, smiling. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars emerge in the twilight. Then she spoke, her voice hesitant. Do you ever think about what happened back then? With Mom? I took a sip of tea, considering her question. Sometimes, I admitted. But not in the way you might think. It's less about what I lost and more about what I learned. Like what? She asked, her curiosity genuine. That sometimes love isn't enough, I said. You can love someone with all your heart, but if they don't value that love, it won't last. And that's okay. It taught me to appreciate the love that's mutual, the kind that grows stronger over time instead of weaker. Natalie nodded, her eyes thoughtful. Do you hate her? Mom, I mean. I shook my head. No, Nat. I don't hate her. Hate only keeps you stuck in the past. I've let it go. What she did hurt, and it changed our family, but holding on to anger doesn't help anyone. She leaned her head on my shoulder, her warmth a comforting reminder of why I had fought so hard to keep going. You're a good man, Dad, she said softly. I'm glad you're happy now. I kissed the top of her head, my heart swelling with gratitude. Thanks, kiddo. That means a lot. As the stars continued to fill the sky, I felt a profound sense of peace. The betrayal that once consumed me had become a distant memory, overshadowed by the life I had built from its ashes. I had lost a marriage, but I had found myself, and in doing so, I had created a future worth living for. Because in the end, life isn't about the moments that break us. It's about how we rise, how we rebuild, and how we choose to love again. Years passed, and life settled into a quiet, fulfilling rhythm. My children grew up, and the scars of the past became lessons rather than burdens. Every so often, would catch a glimpse of the life I once had, Beth's laughter at a family gathering or an old photograph tucked away in a box, and it would stir a faint ache in my chest. But it wasn't sadness. It was something softer, a reminder of how far I had come. One winter evening, I attended Natalie's engagement party, surrounded by family and friends. The house buzzed with laughter and excitement as she introduced her fiancé's family to ours. Beth was there, of course, sitting quietly in a corner, a bittersweet smile on her face. At one point, she approached me, her steps tentative. Mark, she said, her voice tinged with uncertainty. Beth, I replied, offering a polite nod. She hesitated, searching for words. I wanted to say thank you. For raising our kids the way you did. They're amazing people, and that's because of you. Her words caught me off guard. For the first time in years, I saw a glimmer of the woman I had once loved, a woman humbled by time and regret. They're amazing because they had both of us, I said simply. Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, it felt as though we were two old friends, bound not by love but by a shared history. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice breaking. For everything. I nodded, my voice steady. I forgave you a long time ago, Beth. For my sake, not yours. Carrying that pain only made it harder to move forward. She smiled faintly, wiping her tears. You're a better person than I ever deserved. I didn't respond. There was nothing more to say. Later that night, as I watched Natalie and her fiancé laugh together, I felt an overwhelming sense of pride. My children had grown into kind, resilient, and loving individuals, despite the fractures in their upbringing. Lauren, my wife, slipped her hand into mine, her presence a steady anchor. She didn't need to ask what I was thinking, she already knew. You've done a good job, Mark, she said softly. I squeezed her hand, gratitude swelling in my chest. We've done a good job, I corrected. As the party continued around us, I felt a sense of closure, a quiet understanding that life, though imperfect and unpredictable, had brought me exactly where I needed to be. The past no longer held power over me. Beth's betrayal, the pain it caused, the life we lost, it had all led me to this moment, surrounded by the people I loved, with a future full of possibility. And for that, I was grateful. Sometimes, the most beautiful chapters of our lives are born from the ashes of the ones we thought would last forever. The key is learning to let go, to forgive, not for the sake of others, but for ourselves. Because in the end, the strength to rebuild is what truly defines us. Thank you for watching to the end. Write in the comments what you liked and what you would like to see next.